Karen, the hoe, was assigned to inspect dangerous goods threatening the neighborhood, but ended up with a federal prison sentence and a multi-million-dollar fine. How did an ordinary citizen become a national security threat in just 3 minutes of live broadcasting? Welcome to Karen Karma. What device are you using to watch this video? Please share with us in the comments. I'm not the type to panic easily. As the owner of a logistics company that has been working with the federal government for 23 years, I faced nationwide supply chain crises, managed hundreds of shipments labeled classified, and even reported directly to a national security advisory team. That is to say, I'm no stranger to tension. But never in my career had I been stalked by an whole lady as if I were a federal criminal suspect. My company's main warehouse is located at the end of a quiet industrial park, less than a 20-minute drive from downtown. We operate smoothly thanks to our multi-layer security system, a 7-foot-high steel fence, infrared cameras, access cards, and security personnel working in shifts 24 by 7. However, there was one thing I hadn't anticipated. The warehouse was right next to a residential area with an extremely active hole. And at the head of that hole was Mrs. Margaret. What can I say? She's the kind of person who, upon seeing someone park 1 inch out of line, immediately takes a picture, sends an email warning to the entire neighborhood, and then calls the city to report an urban safety violation. In over a year since I moved the warehouse here, she had submitted no fewer than 12 complaints to the local authorities, each one with extremely serious content, such as strange noises coming from the warehouse at midnight, an unusual chemical odor emanating from the air conditioning system, someone in uniform entering and leaving before dawn, highly suspicious. I once tried to explain things gently. 6 months ago, I took the initiative to attend an home meeting where she was endlessly complaining about someone's fence being painted the wrong color. To introduce myself. Hello, Mrs. Margaret. I'm Mark, the owner of the logistics warehouse next door. She gave me a dismissive glance, her tone as flat as if speaking to a convicted criminal just released on bail. I know who you are. You're the one coordinating those trucks that deliver goods at 2 a.m. I smile, trying to keep the peace. Yes, sometimes we have to receive shipments late from a military base, but all are authorized and strictly controlled. Before I could finish, she raised her hand as if she'd just obtained some evidence. You just said military, right? I bet it's not ordinary goods then. Let me guess, explosives, chemical weapons, or just some smuggled items. I was stunned. There was something in her eyes that made me suspect not mere curiosity, but a paranoid obsession like those seen in documentaries about self-proclaimed, truth-seeking government exposers. From that day on, Mrs. Margaret not only stood outside the warehouse filming, but also began live streaming. Hello, community residents. This is Ho Margaret, your friendly, justice-driven Ho president, monitoring an extremely suspicious activity at the industrial park right by your homes. She said to the camera while pointing toward my warehouse. Don't be fooled by those quiet containers over there. I will expose the truth. Anyone else might have taken it as a joke, but I didn't, because every one of her videos came with hashtags. Hash exposing the cover-up. Hash military secrets next door. Hash Hoamagira ton duty. I sighed every time I reviewed the security camera footage and saw her silhouette standing by the fence, hands akimbo like a retired military officer mistakenly assigned to a covert mission. I muttered to myself. I coordinate defense shipments, work with contracts with numbers longer than a bank account, and yet I have to worry about an old lady who thinks she's an FBI agent. I once consoled myself. At least she's just filming from outside. But no, I had underestimated her by a lot, because I never imagined that. One day, Mrs. Margaret would decide to turn herself into a self-appointed agent and cross the boundaries of security, reason, and the law. That afternoon, the sky was clear, not a cloud in sight. I remember it vividly because I had to wear a neatly pressed black suit, a navy tie, and carry a briefcase full of documents to attend a seminar at the city hall. The topic sounded dry: interdisciplinary cooperation in defense logistics security. But for me, it was an opportunity to update policies and maintain credibility with federal partners. I left the warehouse at 2:15 p.m., completely at ease, as everything had been programmed. Cameras were operational, security personnel were on duty, and the container doors were locked triple. There was only one thing I hadn't counted on. Margaret also had her own plan. I knew something was off around 3:10 p.m. because the camera clearly recorded her appearing outside the east security gate, not to film as usual, but to take action. Real action. She was wearing a beige jacket, sporting oversized sunglasses like an amateur spy. And I swear I'm not making this up. She even had a Bluetooth headset on, as if coordinating with a special ops team lurking in the distance. Beside her was a teenager, about 17 years old, wearing a GoPro backpack and holding an iPhone mounted on a gimbal like a professional cameraman. Perhaps her grandchild, or someone lured by her sweet promises. Want to be a citizen journalist? I'll give you an exclusive scoop. It's time to act, she whispered into her headset, which wasn't connected to anyone. Then she turned to the cameraman. Record from now on. We're carrying out a community investigation mission. With unshakable confidence, Mrs. Margaret pulled out a fake employee ID card from her handbag, bearing my company's logo printed, off color and with the name in Comic Sans font. She handed the card to the young afternoon security guard, declaring in a tone loud enough to be recorded, "I'm here to inspect the warehouse as requested by the Community Oversight Committee. There have been many complaints, and I can't just sit back while the neighborhood is threatened." The inexperienced guard, seeing her articulate speech, the card in her hand, and a camera rolling, became confused. She didn't give him time to think. "If you stop me, you're aiding the cover-up of illegal goods," she snapped, loud enough for the mic to pick up. And just like that, she got in. No one expected that after months of lurking and secretly filming from behind the fence, Mrs. Margaret would finally set foot into the battlefield she had always suspected. She walked along the row of containers as if patrolling a border, eyes sharp, whispering into her phone. "Is the camera still rolling? All right. I'm going to expose them." Then she stopped in front of one particular container, container number 7, which was already marked in red with the words classified. "Do not open," pasted conspicuously on the outside. But Mrs. Margaret, instead of stopping at the warning, appeared, even more excited. "Oh, look at this. If nothing suspicious were going on, why would there be such a stark warning?" The cameraman whispered softly. "Aren't you sure you should open it, my dear? The truth always lies behind forbidden doors. Record this well. I'm about to open the eyes of all America." And then she removed the lock. I thought things like breaking into a military zone and live streaming only happened in movies. Who would have guessed the main character was the neighborhood hoe lady? The moment the container door swung open was also the moment when all the nightmares began. A very faint clicking sound came from the container ceiling. The sensor had been triggered, marking an unauthorized entry into a compartment of classified goods. Within 6 seconds, the military-grade security system immediately sent a signal to the Federal Command Center, locked down all access gates, and activated Level 1 security protocol. Sirens blared like screams in the night. Red warning lights flashed all over the warehouse. The steel doors automatically and slowly shut like a scene from Mission Impossible, but this time there was no Tom Cruise, only Mrs. Margaret and the teenage cameraman. live streaming. Meanwhile, I, still seated in the courtroom at City Hall, received a message from the head of security. Urgent, unauthorized entry into Container 7. Verification. Female, about 60 years old, wearing a beige jacket, sporting headphones, and currently live streaming. I was stunned. Another message came immediately after. Camera confirmed, that is, Margaret. I put down my pen, staring at my phone screen. I stuttered. No way, damn. She just filed a complaint yesterday and I sprang from my seat, almost running out of the courtroom. Every step felt as heavy as lead. In my mind, there was only one question. Who does she think she is? The Nancy Drew of the neighborhood. When I drove back to the warehouse, my car barely reached the stop line before the entire industrial park had ceased being an industrial park. It had turned into a crime scene. Four black SUVs with no license plates were parked in a U-shaped right in front of the main gate. A military truck in mossy green was blocking the entrance to the container zone. Police lights flashed red and blue, splashing across the ground. The air was thick with tension. My internal security personnel stood in line, their faces drained of all color. And in the center of that blockade was Margaret. She was being held by two tactical gear-clad officers, her hands still waving wildly in the air, as if directing a campaign. I am an American citizen with rights. This area is not a military zone. You have no right to detain me like a criminal, she shouted, her voice booming like a fire engine siren. An FBI agent turned, his tone as cold as ice hitting a whiskey glass. You are being detained for a serious federal security violation. We require you to remain silent unless you have an attorney. Margaret's mouth dropped open. No one bothered to look at the phone she was holding, because everyone was staring at another phone in the hand of a special operations officer. He swiped on the screen, then turned to me as I had just arrived. Are you the CEO of this facility? I nodded. Mark Dawson. I manage this entire complex. What is happening? He handed the screen to me. She's live streaming the entire break-in and container opening on both TikTok and Facebook. The live stream still has active traces and is under investigation by both platforms. I picked up the phone, my heart pounding like a drum in a championship football game. On the screen, the video was clearly visible, with the title in bold like a slap in the face. Expose illegal military trafficking. Margaret saves the day. The video began with footage of Margaret standing in front of Container 7. This is the warehouse next to my home, which I've been suspicious of for the past 8 months. And today, I will show you what the government doesn't want you to know. Then came the scene of her struggling to open the seal. Despite the warning that this was a piece of national defense property marked red classified. Just as her hand touched it, an alarm blared deafeningly. They're warning me? Fine, that only proves I'm right. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. In my head, only one thought remained. In less than 3 minutes, she went from being a concerned citizen to a national security threat. A technical staff member standing next to me, bewildered, said, "Boss, that live stream was shared over 2,000 times before we could report it for takedown." I turned, dumbfounded. 2,000 shares. In 3 minutes. He nodded, his face ashen as if drained of blood. And that's not counting the supplementary video on her secondary channel, with the caption, "What is being hidden in my neighborhood?" which appears to be spreading to Twitter already. I nearly collapsed. In another corner, Margaret, despite being detained, continued to protest loudly. I had no idea that was military property. I only thought it was smuggled goods. Why are you treating me like a terrorist? An FBI agent, unable to hide his irritation, spoke in a low but clear tone. "Ma'am, you attempted to breach the seal and broadcast images and details of a device resembling a military training simulator on international social media platforms. This could force a complete overhaul of training protocols in the region. I stepped back, leaning against a truck, my heart in disarray. In my mind, I saw a cascade of federal contracts being re examined, emergency meetings, internal reports, and losses dancing like phantoms. Millions of dollars in disruption costs. The entire system forced to change its shipping cycle because of one meddling ho lady. I muttered to myself, almost under my breath. Margaret, not only did you breach the fence, you went beyond reason and common sense. Do you think TikTok is mightier than federal law? This isn't an action movie, and you're not the protagonist. But sadly, the internet made her think so. 3 weeks after the incident, the federal court held its first trial session. Margaret appeared in court wearing a gray suit, no longer sporting the oversized sunglasses, the Bluetooth headset, or the community surveillance for safety slogan. She was just a middle-aged woman in the courtroom, her hands trembling slightly, her eyes darting around as if finally realizing. This was not a mission to expose, but real life, with real consequences. The prosecutor presented the case clearly. Defendant Margaret Davis unlawfully entered a protected facility under 18 U.S. Code 1382, the National Security Act. Not only did she trespass, but she also live-streamed content containing images and descriptions of military training devices classified as classified on public social media platforms, specifically TikTok and Facebook, thereby severely impacting transportation processes, training structures, and national defense safety. The consequence of her actions led to the suspension of at least 3 federal contracts, causing an estimated $2.4 million in damages, not to mention the reputational and security repercussions for the parties involved. Margaret's lawyer tried to mitigate the situation. My client had no malicious intent. She was merely a concerned citizen for her neighborhood, caught up in a sense of duty without fully understanding the legal repercussions. But when the live stream video was shown in court, with Margaret's clear voice, the government cannot hide forever. I, Ho Margaret, will expose everything for the truth and for the community. The courtroom fell silent. No defense could cover up the consequences of what she had done. The judge pounded his gavel, his tone severe. You are not a victim of misunderstanding. You willingly took action, fully aware that you were crossing legal boundaries. The law is not established to cater to individual emotions, especially those who exploit ignorance to endanger national security. The final sentence was pronounced: 3 years in federal prison, a civil fine of $2.4 million for damages due to disrupted supply chains and leaked information, a permanent ban from accessing social media platforms for 15 years after completing the sentence. Margaret slumped in her chair. For the first time, I saw her silent. The residents in the neighborhood felt liberated. A new Facebook group emerged called We Survived Ho Karen. There, people recounted the times they were fined for a flower pot being off by 3 inches, the children who were photographed because they played near the roadside. One retired man even wrote a poem. Margaret, the Ho gatekeeper, now a symbol of a scandal bigger than the backyard. Local news channels did not miss the opportunity either. Ho Karen, self-made federal defendant. I received many phone calls. Reporters, colleagues, even a retired general I once collaborated with. Everyone asked, is it true she was live streaming? How did she even get in? It's like a Hollywood movie, Mark. I could only smile wryly. Believe me, not even Hollywood would dare write such a crazy script. 3 months later, I walked around the warehouse at dawn, where everything had once been turned upside down. 3 new layers of security had been added. A facial recognition system that only allowed access to those with federal clearance. A third perimeter fence with pressure sensors. And notably, an internal regulation banning any filming devices within 300 feet of Container 7 where the coup had occurred. I stood before that container, the early morning light shining on every newly painted stroke. I murmured, who would have thought I wouldn't have to worry about cyber terrorism, but rather posting a warning sign to avoid home Margaret? I remain me, Mark Dawson, running a logistics company serving the federal government, signing contracts, coordinating shipments, and drinking my coffee on time every morning. But I was no longer the same. Now I understand that the threat to national security doesn't always come from foreign hackers or internal spies. Sometimes it comes from a bored Karen and a connected smartphone. And Margaret, she now lives in the collective memory of the community as a modern legend. No longer the model citizen, but a living precedent, cited in security training as a classic example of uncontrolled media disaster. I recall once at a federal security meeting, a young person asked me, if you were to meet Mrs. Margaret again, what would you say? I smiled. I don't need to say anything. The court has spoken, and her legacy, it leaves a big lesson, not just for me, but for an entire generation. TikTok is not a ticket to justice, and arrogance cannot triumph over the law. This story, as absurd and even a bit unbelievable as it sounds, is a candid snapshot of the modern world, where an ordinary person, if they don't know their limits, can cause extraordinary consequences. And I hope, if you've read this far, you remember one thing. Curiosity may be natural, but thoughtless actions are disastrous. Margaret didn't know that, but now the whole country does. The story of Ho Karen may make us laugh at its absurdity, but behind it lies a profound lesson. The line between a proactive citizen and a lawbreaker is only one impulsive act apart. In an age where everyone has a camera, social media, and sometimes an oversized ego, understanding one's own limits and those of the law is of utmost importance. Curiosity is not wrong, but when combined with ignorance and arrogance, it can lead to incalculable consequences. And what about you? Have you ever encountered a Karen version in your neighborhood, office, or even in an online group? Please share your story in the comments. We'd love to hear from you. If you enjoy everyday stories told from a unique, humorous yet humane perspective like this one, hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. And don't forget to turn on notifications so that you can join us in exploring more strange but meaningful stories in everyday life. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video on Karen Karma.